Hi, this is Mark Farnham with Apologetics for the Church, and with me today is our Director of Research and Intern Development, Jeffrey Mindler. And we are glad to be back. It's been a while since we recorded a video, mostly because I'm on sabbatical and therefore sequestered while we're writing a book. Jeff and I are writing a book together that will tentatively be titled Every Believer Equipped. I don't think we have a subtitle yet, do we?
I don't believe so.
Yeah. Something like taking gospel engagement to the next level.
Yeah.
I think that's a good subtitle.
Yeah, and it's designed as a follow-up to the Every Believer Confident book that you wrote. So Keep an eye out for that.
Yeah. Maybe late 2027, early 2028. But today we are talking about a topic that is incredibly interesting, that a lot of people don't know about. There's a lot of misconceptions about it, and that is the myth of the conflict between faith and science. Mm-hmm. And this is a vast subject. I've been reading about 4 or 5 different books on it right now. Some cover the history, some cover the modern expressions. But basically, there is a widespread belief among lots of people, including some Christians, that there is a necessary and unbridgeable gap, a conflict that cannot be in any way brought to peace between science and faith of any kind, although originally this arose in the context of Christian Europe and Christian America. So it's most often focused on the conflict between Christianity and science today. And we should clarify evolutionary science.
Correct. Yeah, there's a lot of Christians that for one reason or another, have this idea that Christianity and science are incompatible or in conflict.
Right.
And if you're religious, if you're a Christian, then by default, that must mean you're not scientific or you don't believe in science. You know, why don't you accept the science? So,
right.
But I'm curious, what initially kind of spurned your interest in this topic?
It's pretty basic.
Late?
A church asked me to speak on it. So,
hey, yeah. That's a great reason.
That's how a lot of my particular topics of interest get explored.
The practical needs of the saints.
That's right. That's right. But in reading this, I've come across fantastic books. And the truth is, in the field of history, most historians know and are settled on the idea that this was a manufactured conflict, that there is no conflict. Now, in the sciences, that's not the case because much of professional science, whether it's a university level or in the practice, many scientists are evolutionists. I think there is a growing population of creationists and intelligent design. Certainly, there are many who believe in God and still practice their science. And therefore, right off the bat, at the practical level, there should be a clear hint that this gap between, supposed gap between science and Christianity simply is not true.
Yeah.
And I think about from the time my parents came to Christ when I was in elementary school, and we began attending fundamentalist Baptist churches. Every church I went to, we had practicing scientists in the church who were men and women of faith, committed Christians. And that's probably true in almost every church, that there are people who are in the sciences, either at the university level, clinic level, hospital level, and they are firm believers and practice science. So that should tell us right away that there's a problem with this idea that there's a conflict.
Yeah, they must not have gotten the memo that Christianity and science are incompatible or something.
Yes. And so the research I've been doing dives very deep into the history behind this. And the truth is, when you go back in history, many of the early groundbreaking scientists in the Western world are explicitly not only Christian, but are explicit in their declaration that they do science based on the belief that there is all-powerful sovereign God who governs the functioning of the universe, who upholds all things in the universe, including molecules and planets and solar systems. And they therefore can do science knowing that the universe is not subject to blind, random forces,
Yeah.
but rather to a God who upholds things.
Yeah.
And so in pursuing this, I've discovered some wonderful points of clarity, but we'd like to unpack this for us and talk about where this idea of the myth came from and how do we dispel the myth.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, Jeff, what have you heard about the conflict between science and faith?
So from what I've heard, just talking with some local atheists and such, that kind of standard line of, Christianity, science has shown Christianity to be not true. Certain things we know that the earth is older than X amount of years, whatever Christians say. We know that evolution disproves the story of creation with Adam and Eve. So those common level assertions that, we know this from science, that therefore this disproves certain aspects of Christianity. And so kind of a lot of it is on that surface level that your average unbeliever, atheist, maybe have heard. But, we just know scientifically, miracles don't happen, so scientifically, Christianity is at odds with what we know from the scientific community. So those are some of the more common ones that I've heard of. Just, we know from science teaches us these things. Therefore, Christianity can't be true because of some of the things it posits.
Right. Here's a good quote from Richard Dawkins' book, The God Delusion. I believe the best-selling book by the New Atheists. It came out almost 20 years ago.
Yeah.
It's incredibly entertaining. Dawkins is a good writer. He loves to just level blistering critiques against Christians and anyone who disagrees with him. So it's entertaining.
Yeah, not very academically or scholarly in regard, but entertaining.
As soon as he leaves the field of science, which he's an amazing scientist, I've read some of his science work in which he speaks of, echolocation of bats and other things like that. When he sticks with the science, he's a wonderful writer, full of awe. This is one of the chapters in our book.
Yeah.
It is a contradiction to say all things came about through an unguided process and that we should be in awe of them.
Yep.
This is an accident of nature.
Yeah.
Why should I be in awe? There was no preconception behind this. It's the equivalent of saying, this construction company was moving paint into a third floor corporate building that they were going to paint, and 10 cans fell from the forklift and splattered on the ground. Let's all gather around and look in amazement at the pattern. No, we recognize this is an accident, needs to be cleaned up.
Yeah.
But when an intelligent artist creates a painting, that is worthy of standing in awe.
Yeah.
So Dawkins will say things like this: we believe in evolution because the evidence supports it. Makes it sound cut and dried, like all we care about is the evidence. And then he says this: we would abandon it overnight if new evidence arose to disprove it. No real fundamentalist would ever say anything like that. So, of course, he lumps all Christians in with this idea of fundamentalism. But he basically says we just follow the evidence wherever it leads. And that sounds compelling. That sounds like, well, isn't that what we should do in science? And yet, every book, this is the problem with Dawkins, is he is a great scientist, a terrible philosopher. And this issue of being neutral, that I just follow the evidence wherever I go, no one in philosophy believes that human beings are neutral.
Yeah.
And that we have no no interest in things turning out one way or the other. And of course, the Bible portrays us as not neutral. Rather, we are people bent against the authority and lordship of God. And as a result, then, we are not open to whatever comes down the pike. We want certain things. And this is why Richard Lewontin of Harvard, his famous saying is, we believe in science despite the patent absurdities of some of its constructs, despite the just so stories we're told that you're not supposed to question. And he tells us why: because we cannot allow a divine foot in the door.
Yeah. And that quote by Dawkins, when he says we would change our minds should the evidence, it honestly reveals a little naivete on his part of like the human nature. and what people will do to justify and to defend their own beliefs, even in the face of opposing evidence. So it comes up when you read that was the thing that popped in my head. It was like, philosophically speaking, we know that like people don't change their minds like that. And so to say, oh, we'll follow the evidence and we'd be willing to give it up tomorrow if it changed, it just go,
it's not true.
That's not how people work.
And what's interesting is Dawkins is taking something true, the idea that in science, theories are held to for their explanatory power. But over time, if a theory fails to be able to explain things, people become open to new things. But they do not quickly abandon old theories. A famous groundbreaking book in the 1960s, I believe it was, Thomas Kuhn, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions. He looks back in history and shows here's what happens when an old scientific theory, an old structure, can no longer contain new evidence. He says, those who hold to that do not quickly jump to a new one. They resist. They fight. They'll persecute their fellow scientists. Why? Because they have invested interest. This is called the sunk cost fallacy. You've sunk all your scientific career into believing one theory, and a new one comes along that can explain things yours can't. Boy, you are going to fight that new theory because that will invalidate some or all of your life's work.
Right.
And so Kuhn shows in this book, The Structure of Scientific Revolutions, that it's more like a seesaw. And when new people go out onto the end of the seesaw that's in the air, you still have the vast majority of people sitting on the lower end. And only when enough people, little by little, make their way up, does the seesaw then begin to even out. And when it finally does that, it quickly switches to the new paradigm. But this can take decades or hundreds of years.
Yeah.
So this idea that Dawkins is giving is simply not true. No scientist does this. I think about, for example, if Dawkins became convinced because of the evidence that a God exists. Think about how that would invalidate much of his life's work.
Right.
Not the particular scientific things he teaches, but every one of his books would have to be recalled and rewritten. There's no way. And that's what we have to realize in science. It's one of the limitations of science. Flawed, finite, biased people, susceptible to pride, corruption. We know this in recent stories of top scientists at places like MIT that are corrupted by foreign spies and, give away secrets. Or recently, with the COVID pandemic, truth is coming out now about things were hidden, things were covered up. This is one of the limitations of science, which is a wonderful gift from God. But science doesn't happen on its own.
Right.
People do science, and people are flawed, finite, self-interested, and so forth.
Yeah, and people are not neutral either.
No.
Yeah, and one other thing I was going to add was peer pressure.
Yes.
The community of your peers surrounding you, and so to go against that is a difficult thing for anybody. And so that also plays a part in exerting influence over scientists.
That's right. So let's talk about where does the myth come from? It was building for a while, but the 1800s is where this myth really then begins to explode. This is when you have two books that come out by authors in the mid to late 1800s. Actually, in the late 1800s, John Draper, who writes A History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science, publishes it in 1874. 0 footnotes, Jeff.
Wow.
So many of his claims cannot be examined. Where did he get this idea from? Is this a correct quotation? And the book is full of errors and mistakes.
You know what that would have gotten me in graduate school?
An F. Yeah.
If you don't cite your sources, you fail.
Yeah. So John Draper. A second guy is Andrew Dixon White. Draper was born in 1811, lived through most of the 1800s. Andrew Dixon White, born in 1832, dies in 1918. Draper's book is A History of the Conflict Between Religion and Science. White's book is A History of the Warfare of Science with Theology and Christendom, published in 1896. Both these books today are roundly discredited among historians. Real problems in their historical citations, just in their characterization of things. And yet these captured the imagination. Andrew Dixon White is part of the founding of Cornell University in New York, an Ivy League school, the very first university in America founded apart from explicitly religious convictions. And he wanted that. He and Ezra Cornell, I think it was Ezra Cornell, created this university specifically with no religious dogmatism or dogma attached to it, so it could be a free place of inquiry. And yet White's book is problematic all the way through. But you have to realize what's going on. By the 1800s, the higher critical movement in Germany that tore apart the Bible throughout the 1800s, rooted in French atheism and philosophy in the 1700s. This has been building for a long time. And it is opposition to Christianity arising out of the Enlightenment, which says man will decide. Man is now the measure of things. Going back to the ancient Greek, I'm drawing a blank on who said man is the measure of all things. I want to say Democritus, but I don't think that's it. But rooted in this idea that we do not receive knowledge from revelation from God. We, applying our rational senses, our rational abilities, and our reason, can, apart from any revelation, decide the truth. And therefore, God and the scriptures get put under the microscope. And of course, many, if not most, of the theories about the Bible that came out during that time are completely discredited today.
Right.
But in those days, the mood of the Western world, especially through the 1800s into the early 1900s, was in the areas of psychoanalysis, in the areas of archaeology, in the areas of biology and chemistry and physics. We can shake off God. We can form these theories apart from God, and we are now liberated. Of course, that culminated in the 20th century with 2 world wars by the most advanced nations in the world, and that gave rise to postmodernism.
Yeah.
But back to the 1800s, these 2 books had a huge impact on the thinking of people in the Western world coming to believe that science and faith are irreconcilable.
And I hope the listener, one thing, if we can give a nugget of to equip you in this, one thing you want to notice. So the title of that first book, of A History of the Conflict, one of the things that you should do as a listener engaging, you should listen for unargued or unfounded assumptions.
Yes.
And ask yourself, wait a minute, is that assumption, is there something baked into that has not been proven? And the title itself assumes that there's a conflict.
Yes.
And so that you can he's laying his cards on the table right out of the gate just in the title. But one thing that you want to do as Christian apologists is begin to ask the question of, well, wait a minute, is there an assumption under here that has yet to be proven true? And if so, we need to ask about it. And so right there in the title, you can already see there's an unfounded assumption there that needs to be questioned.
That's right. And what happens is this supposed conflict arises partly from the fault of bad theology. That is, some of the claims made by people that claim to be Christian or deist are what helped to create the conflict, because they would say things like, think about when it comes to the orbits of planets. They assumed, those who began to study the orbits of planets, they were not atheists. They were deists or, moderately Christian. They said, if God is a perfect being, which we believe he is, and does everything perfectly in order, then the orbits of planets must be circular, must all go the same direction, and therefore this is a necessary corollary of God's wisdom and rationality. Now ask yourself, the fact that God is infinitely wise, does that require him to make the orbits of planets and moons perfectly circular and all in the same way? No, but this is what they do. And initially, the first
There's an unspoken assumption there.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you have to challenge that
Right.
assumption.
Yeah, these first bad ideas in science often came out of the minds of people who are trying to hang on to their Christian faith, but were mistaking ideas about God. And the Bible does not require that. And they soon discovered that the orbits are not perfectly circular, and that some orbits of moons around, I think it's Venus and Saturn, go opposite directions than others. And in this mind, this disproves God. And in no way does it disprove God.
Right.
So this is building for a long time. Here's what begins to happen in the 1800s, culminating in these two books and the entrenchment of the myth in the mind of the average person in the West. They began to say things like the early church fathers denied the spherical shape of the earth, And here's what happens in this book. One of the best books is Of Popes and Unicorns, Science, Christianity, and How the Conflict Thesis Fooled the World. There's several other good books on this topic. Galileo Goes to Jail, The History of the Warfare Between Christian and Science. Another really good one by American Christian philosopher Alvin Plantinga, Where the Conflict Really Lies, Science, Religion, and Naturalism. But in this book of Popes and Unicorns, it points out the fact that somewhere around 5 early Christian fathers denied the spherical shape of the earth, compared to 10,000 who affirmed it. So here's what happens is these guys dishonestly pick out the 3 or 4 or 5 early Christian fathers who believed the earth was a disc or something like that. And they ignore the 10,000 who affirm the spherical nature of the earth. This is the rampant intellectual dishonesty in this entire myth.
Yeah, going to the exceptions to try to
Yes.
establish a rule, which is just, again, academically, that would also get you an F.
Right, right. And here's what happens then between the fall of the Roman Empire in the 400s AD and the Reformation in the 1500s. This is a period that a later historian, Petrarch, and many others, and it's still taught today, believe then that those 1,000 years or so, from around 500 AD to 1500 AD, were the Dark Ages, especially between 500 and 1,000. Again, this has been roundly disproven. There's wonderful books out there. I just picked up 2 books. One is called The Light Ages. The other is called The Bright Ages, showing the incredible work in mathematics and science and language, mostly preserved. Jeff, where is it mostly preserved? Languages and learning in the medieval period.
In the monastic orders.
In the monasteries by Catholic monks.
Yeah.
It's not out among the seculari, which there aren't even that many secular people. Almost everyone, at least in Europe, is somewhat Christian, and this is mostly a Western question anyways. But no scholar of history anymore believes that it was a Dark Ages.
Yeah.
Nobody believes that.
Do you know where that initial phrase came from?
I think it comes from Petrarch.
It's an Enlightenment phrase that the folks in the Enlightenment, like Voltaire, looked and tried to disparage what would have happened before. You mentioned those 2 works. I mean, Rodney Stark's book, How the West Won, is a fantastic history showing that the Dark Ages were not in fact dark, but there was a ton of innovation and ideas, founding of universities as we know them.
Yeah.
When did that happen?
Yep.
In the supposed Dark Ages.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Oxford, 1231. University of Paris before that. Cambridge soon after.
That myth needs to be jettisoned and no longer believed.
So part of the benefit of this book of Popes and Unicorns is he goes back and quotes early scientists. Think about Francis Bacon, who is the often credited with developing the scientific method. Francis Bacon and Robert Hooke, another early scientist who does groundbreaking work, is in the upper tier of scientists historically. Both of them said that science was a gift from God to help humankind to reverse the devastating effects of Adam's sin. Right? So think about it. What does science do? It brings improvements in life, medicine, technology, a better understanding of the world. And in their minds, as Christians doing science, they're doing science rooted in the idea that God upholds all things in the universe, and therefore science should be directed toward the good. This is something incredibly missing in 21st century science. There are many people out there who are seeking to do science for the express purpose of reducing the population of the world, not for human good. Or for evil purposes. So when it comes to the history of science, many of the early and most significant scientists in history, right up until the 20th century, you think of Mendel and others dealing with the genetic code. These are Christians doing science rooted in their belief in God.
And they were explicit about it.
Oh, yeah.
They didn't hide it. They were expressly telling us, like that quote you just read. I mean, that is phenomenal. This is the express purpose of science and why we're doing it. So they didn't hide the reasons why they were engaging in the scientific endeavor.
Because they realize if there is no God, then there is no order and regularity, uniformity to nature, and therefore things can happen that are different. So what happens in one part of the world or at one time may not be replicable. And as a result, then science can't be done. This is one of the chapters in our book is you cannot believe, it's a contradiction to say the universe came about through an unguided, undesigned, unintended process, and nothing upholds it, and let's do science. You can't do that.
Yeah. And all you have to do is ask the person making this claim that this is the universe as we know it is unguided, random chance. Just ask them, and you think that gives you a good, solid foundation for doing science.
Yeah.
And help them make that connection of, well, wait a minute. For science to be possible, it requires X, Y, and Z foundations to even get off the ground. Can your worldview actually account for those things? And if they're being honest with, well, we believe the world is random, chance, unguided, that does not provide a good foundation for doing science. And so sometimes we just need to help connect the dots for them.
That's right. Here's a couple of interesting passages here, and then we will start to wind this down. In the chapter, Myths Everywhere, the authors say that one of the biggest myths to dispel is the idea that science is entirely dispassionate. And they quote nuclear physicist Michael Brooks. He says, the brand identity of science is reinforced with adjectives such as logical, responsible, trustworthy, predictable, dependable, gentlemanly, straight, boring, unexciting, objective, rational. Not in thrall to passion or emotion, a safe pair of hands. And then he concludes, in summary, inhuman. We've been engaging with a caricature of science, not the real thing. Another quote, Tom McLeish, a pioneer in soft matter physics. He says, the real story of science is far more complex. No scientific theory is born antelope fashion, fully formed in limb and energy, able to run for itself and keep out of harm's way. Our ideas emerge far more frequently as a marsupial birth, inadequate, vulnerable, and powerless. They need to be loved into being. And then he goes on and quotes Henry Cowles, historian of modern science. There is no such thing as the scientific method. And there never was, he says. And yet the scientific method, quote unquote, is alive and well. The idea of a set of steps that justifies science's authority has persisted in the face of constant denials of its existence. Why? Because the, quote unquote, scientific method is a myth. And myths are powerful things. How we talk about science, how we account for its origins and argue for its results instills mythical authority. And then he goes on in the book and talks about how in the sciences and universities, you will be bullied if you want to bring God or miracles or creation or design into it. And this is true. John Lennon at Oxford University tells a story when he was a young mathematician. Several professors sat him down and said, if you want to go anywhere in this field, you're going to have to give up your Christian faith. And he refused, and he's now a decorated, acknowledged expert of mathematics at Oxford University, one of the oldest in the world. So we could go on and on. This whole issue of the myth of the conflict between science and religion really boils down to, as Alvin Plantinga says in his book, Where the Conflict Really Lies, the conflict is between materialism and scientism. Materialism says the only things that exist are material realities, and scientism says that science is the only way to knowledge. That scientism is a real problem for science because science is full of metaphysical assumptions. It has to be. Metaphysical realities such as logic, the laws of logic, even things like value of what is good or evil. These things play into science, and yet those who claim science and religion are incompatible simply are wrong. The problem is not between science and Christianity. It's between science and materialism, atheistic materialism. That's where the real conflict lies. So I hope this has been helpful to you. There's much more to say on this issue, but as Christians, we should not feel in any way intimidated by science. Science has multiple limitations, including the overturning of previously held to with absolute certainty principles and beliefs that have now been overturned. Therefore, we believe that science is a gift from God to help us discover his glory, to mitigate the effects of the fall, and to use it for the good of humanity. And therefore, true science will never conflict against a proper understanding of God or the scriptures.
Amen.
Hope this has helped.